Hello and welcome back to biology. Today we're going to talk about mutations. And have you ever noticed how life doesn't always go the way you had planned? I'm sure everyone's had that experience. It's really quite similar to a lot of things in biology as well. Sometimes processes and events don't exactly go as planned. When there are changes to processes, we call those mutations. And we have just been discussing several major processes of DNA replication, of transcription, of translation, and sometimes they don't go as planned either. So I've used the word here mistake, but it's really not a very good word to use because sometimes the changes can actually be beneficial. So let's look at some of these kinds of changes or mutations that can take place. Point mutations occur when there is a change in a single base pair in the DNA. So if that were to happen, we would end up with a different amino acid than expected in our chain of amino acids. We can see an example of that here. If we change this codon so that it is no longer CAA but AAA, we'll get an entirely different amino acid. Instead of glutamine at that point in the chain, we have lysine at that point in the chain. Notice that a point mutation does not affect the rest of the chain, going that direction or that direction. Just to try and exemplify what that kind of change would look like, we could consider, let's say, reading a sentence. And if we had a sentence that was, the boy ate the food, for example, and we decided to make a point change and change the D in food to an L, we would get a sentence that read, the boy ate the fool. Very different meaning, yet the rest of the sentence does remain the same. Another kind of mutation is called a frameshift mutation. In this mutation, a single base is either added to or deleted from the DNA. And just as an example here, we have this base pair, and it has been added to the genetic material. Right here we have our normal wild type DNA strand and mRNA strand, and those have been producing these amino acids, or they are going to anyway. That's an example of what would happen. If there were, however, within this codon, right here, if we look right there, a different base pair that was inserted, this would be the mutation being represented, and we insert that in there, we're going to, first of all, get a very different amino acid, but all the amino acids after that, here, they're going to be different as well. In this case, it triggered a chain termination, a stop code. So the rest of the amino acids that may have been going on here or being coded to produce will not exist in our new chain. So this is a very different kind of mutation from the point mutation because it affects the rest of the amino acid chain as well. Similarly, if we were to delete one of the base pairs, we would get a similar problem happening. We would get an entirely different chain for the rest of the chain. Now, a chromosomal mutation is a little bit different. A chromosomal mutation is when structural changes happen in the chromosomes. And here are just a few different types of chromosomal mutations that can occur. If we have a chromosome here and simply remove some of the genetic material, that would be called deletion. There can be cases where extra information is added, called duplication. We could have inversion here, where the genetic material is mixed up. Perhaps it's broken apart and then reassembled incorrectly. We can also have genetic material getting mixed up between genes. Here it's called translocation, where some of the pieces and parts, when they're put back together to different genes, they're getting mixed up. So those are some chromosomal mutations that can happen as well. So what happens to the organism when a mutation occurs? Well, one of the more common effects would be a deleterious effect. When a protein does not work properly, or when it is not able to be made, those are very deleterious effects, very negative for the organism. They can cause damage or possibly death. Certainly they damage the cell that they are targeting, but just depending on what type of protein it is and what the protein's function is, they can be extremely damaging to the organism. An example of a mutation that is created for another organism would be pesticides and herbicides. They, some of them, alter the DNA in the targeted organisms and mutate it so that proteins are blocked from being made and killed. And that is how some of those work. A mutation can be invisible, where that change may not even be noticed by the organism. And there also the rare chance that the mutation is beneficial and that the change produces either a new trait or it could help the organism to adapt to its environment in some way. And here I've written a little, or I've included, I didn't write this, I included this little cartoon because it's an example of a beneficial effect of a mutation. And it is not, don't think of it as beneficial to us, but it is beneficial to this organism. Here we have a bacteria, a normal bacteria, that when an antibiotic is applied to it, it dies. Here is a mutant bacteria. It does not produce a particular enzyme, and when an antibiotic is applied to it, it actually survives. So it's just showing that sometimes mutations can be very beneficial. So one more thing to mention is that mutations, depending on what cell they occur in, will have very different effects as well. Obviously, mutations in reproductive cells would have quite a huge impact on the organism, because if the mutation occurs in a reproductive cell, those mutations will be contained in all the cells of that organism's entire body. So those are very, very impactful for an organism. Mutations within a body cell, those can accumulate over time and not necessarily have quite the impact as those within reproductive cells. As a matter of fact, it is thought that perhaps one of the causes of aging is simply the accumulation of cells with less than optimal functioning within the body. So as we live our lives and as time goes on, some of the cells in our bodies produce these mutations, and an accumulation of them over a long period of time can be one of the causes of aging. Also, you probably already know that mutations of DNA in genes that control cell division, that can lead to cancer, which is just the uncontrolled dividing of cells. So those are some of the different kinds of mutations as well that can occur either in reproductive cells or within our current body cells. And mutagens need to definitely be addressed. Mutagens, you probably know this word, but they are agents that can cause a change in DNA, and that's all they mean. I'm just listing two different kinds here. Radiation, and there are different kinds that I'm trying to depict: X-rays, cosmic rays, nuclear radiation, ultraviolet rays. They can be very damaging to well, they can be very damaging to any living cells and can cause breaking and reforming of DNA. They can cause deletions and those types of mutations. So it would be probably wise to limit the exposure to some of those. Cosmic rays, however, and some of these things are just in our natural environment, and they've been around for many, many, many years, and they've been part of our environment and the environment of all of life for a very long time, and it's difficult to limit the exposure to some of these. But chemical exposure, again, some of them are just naturally in our environment, some we have a little more control over. It's always good to limit exposure to chemicals and man-made things that have been either created or concentrated in ways that are dangerous to us. Asbestos, that's actually a naturally occurring substance. It's no longer used in construction, but some of these chemicals cause point mutations that can be damaging to life, to us, to other living things. And although our bodies do have repair mechanisms and cells have amazing ways of checking for mistakes, it is best to limit our exposure when we can to mutagens. So here are some ideas for advanced proficiency. You are welcome to come up with your own ideas as well, because I think some of you have incredibly creative ways of showing above and beyond proficiency. But you could research any of these topics more in depth, find out how the 3D structure of a protein is determined, or hypothesize about how protein 3D structure could be used in pharmaceutical development. It looks like I spelled that wrong, excuse me. But have a great day, and we'll see you in class.